As we begin, we have an incredible offering to ignite our highest thinking. So when we started thinking about this conversation in August, the team asked itself, who can we get that will sense make what's happening by April 2026? And I promise you, as insane as we predicted it might be, none of us had exactly where we are on our bingo card. Amazingly, though, we managed to exceed all expectations with whom we managed to assemble for today's grounding. So please join me in welcoming to the stage 4 giants in the movement for social justice. W. Kamau Bell is a stand-up comedian, director, producer, husband, and dad. For 7 seasons, he was host and executive producer of the 5-time Emmy Award-winning docuseries United Shades of America. In 2023, he won an Emmy.
You can move on.
Oh, no. It's for his HBO documentary, 1000% Me, Growing Up Mixed. His comedy special, Private School Negro, is available on Netflix. He cares too much, and he sleeps too little. Vina Kay is the director of the Piper Fund. Bringing to her role a career committed to racial justice, organizing, and movement building. Prior to joining the fund, she served as vice president of movement capacity building at Race Forward. Vina was executive director of Voices for Racial Justice, working to support a healthy ecosystem of racial justice, organizing in Minnesota through training and leadership development, cultural policy tools, and research practices. Ai-jen Poo is a next-generation labor leader. Award-winning organizer, author, and leading voice in the women's movement, president of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and executive director of Caring Across Generations. She's been recognized among Fortune's World's 50 Greatest Leaders, Time's 100 Most Influential People, MacArthur Genius Award, the Enlightenment Citizen Activist. She's been featured speaker everywhere, including Aspen Ideas Festival, the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity, Milken Institute Global Conference, TED Women, and the Skull World Forum. She's made appearances on PBS, Nightline, MS Now, and CBS. Rinku Sen is the executive director of the Narrative Institute, where she helps social justice movements develop the power to move ideas. She's formerly the executive director of Race Forward and was publisher of the award-winning news site Colorlines. Under Sen's leadership, Race Forward generated some of the most effective, impactful racial justice successes of recent years, including Drop the I Word, a campaign for media outlets to stop referring to immigrants as illegal, resulting in the Associated Press, USA Today, LA Times, and many other outlets changing their practice. I'm so excited about this conversation. We want to use every moment at our disposal for this dynamic conversation, but can we just take a moment to recognize this lineup for all the things they've done that have led them to this stage today? Now I have to actually make a conversation. So, to get started, we clearly in a moment, we're a sea change in society. And I think both here in the US, but also globally. I know, Ai-jen, you've had a framework that you've been using to kind of sense make how to navigate some of this. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Absolutely. First of all, good morning, everyone. And Dwayne, thank you so much for having us. And it's just such an honor to be in this room. I already feel the courage-enabling vibes. So thank you. So after the 2024 election, it was just such a disorienting time. And to help my team figure out how to anchor and actually do strategy, we came up with a framework that is about trying to account for the fact that it's almost like we live in multiple paradigms of reality at the same time. And when we think about how to be impactful and the kind of impact we need to have in this moment, we have to really anchor into these different paradigms and figure out how to move forward and take action strategically. And the first, it's called the 3 Earths framework. And the first Earth is really an acknowledgement that some days in places like California or Illinois where I live, you wake up and it's kind of like it was. Like the system works and the legislature meets and they make decisions and we advocate, we lobby, we push, and it works, and democracy is still functioning at some times in some places in our country. And the tools that we've learned how to use and deploy to impact those systems still work, right? So we've always operated, we've grown up under this assumption in Earth One where that the long arc of history bends towards justice, and our work is to deepen the bend, accelerate the bend, and we have a set of tools that we deploy to do that, and sometimes, in some places, those tools still work. And where democracy still lives and breathes, it's really important that we continue to breathe life into it. At the same time, we have to grapple with the reality that we also live in a second paradigm, which we call Earth 2. And in Earth 2, US citizens are being gunned down in the streets by our own government. Our neighbors and our coworkers are being disappeared with no due process and shipped off to countries they have never known. We have children, babies, being detained in prisons who need urgent health care and are being denied essential health care. It is also a very different world. The Supreme Court just voted to gut the Voting Rights Act, taking us back to the 1800s, and there is a real fundamental crisis, a democratic meltdown that we are facing in Earth 2, and we have to figure out how to slow down the power grab that has happened, that has completely undermined our democratic institutions and norms, while building up the power of people, everyday people in this country in Earth 2. And that is an urgent task that we have to figure out how to wrap our heads around. At the same time, there is also Earth 3, which is the paradigm that comes after Earth 2. And there are major questions on the table about what that future looks like. Are we going to be living in cities that are designed for resilience and sustainability, or are we all going to be going from disaster to disaster, climate disaster to climate disaster? Will we even have a safety net at the federal level? Or could we have universal health care and universal family care, right? Will AI displace millions of working people from the only secure jobs we have left in the economy? Or will we train it to work alongside us to solve for inequality and inequities in our society? Massive questions, and so the work of seeding the future, the Earth 3 that we want to be in the future, also has to happen now, right? It also is the work of now to envision and plant the seeds for that future that we want. And so figuring out how from day to day we have the right balance of doing the now in the places where democracy works with the tools we know how to use, trying the things that we know we need to learn in Earth 2 to slow them down and build us up, and to see that future, because we're not actually going back to Earth 1. And we shouldn't, because we deserve better, right? So thinking about what we need to be doing now also to set the stage for Earth 3.
I mean, narrative has a lot to do with how we've gotten into this second Earth. I'm just wondering if there's anything you want to share about your observations on what's been the underpinning for some of this.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. When I was looking at this question, I remembered a staff meeting at the Applied Research Center, which is now Race Forward, very old school. It's probably 20 years ago, this meeting. And one of my colleagues said, let's work on reparations. And one of my other colleagues said, let's pick something we can win. And it turns out, 20 years later, you can actually win things on reparations. You can win local policies. You can win some land back deals. You can win things. So how did those wins become possible? It wasn't because there was an enormous constituency in this country demanding reparations. It was because the constituency that did want that had a narrative plan that was long-term. And each campaign that they did, one-year campaign, two-year campaign, each thing they asserted, each thing that got written, Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Case for Reparations, helped to build the idea, the theme that reparations are an important thing to do in this country. And now here we are, a place that 20 years ago, my courageous colleagues at the Applied Research Center couldn't really imagine us getting to. So what narrative does is it makes things possible or impossible. It helps our people feel what they're entitled to. Based on the narratives of belonging in this country, you either feel entitled to food stamps or you don't feel entitled. If you feel entitled, you're going to fight for it. But if you don't feel entitled, you're going to be like, oh, well, the system got me again. So what I really want us to take away is that narrative isn't just what we say. It's not just strategic communications. It's a whole way of looking at our situations and explaining them, explaining why they are the way they are and how we get out of them. And it's built by what you do as well as what you say. It's built by the fights you pick, even if you're going to lose. Like, losing is often a narrative strategy because reparations bills have been introduced in Congress for 50 years, I believe, by John Conyers. Year after year, he reintroduces it because without that, there's no entitlement building toward reparations and no sense of social responsibility. So just the last thing I want to say is that funders often say to me, we funded narrative for 5 years, 10 years, and things haven't changed. We haven't changed the whole discourse on our issue. And I have to say it's because you haven't been funding narrative. You've been funding strategic communications attached to policy campaigns and that are short term, and in a short amount of time, 6 months, a year, 2 years, you simply do not have enough time to saturate the whole society with the value that you want to evoke. You can stack up a 1-year campaign, and then the next 1-year campaign, and then the next 1-year campaign to add up to the idea that you want to move, but you have to know what that idea is, and you have to have some long-term trajectory in your head for generating the discourse, the norms, the narrators, and the audiences that eventually become constituencies to make your ideas into policies, practices, institutions, and actions.
It's interesting because I feel like we're in work, we're actively engaged trying to change systems and engage people trying to change systems, but a lot of people are just trying to make it through life. Mm-hmm. And I know, Kamau, you've actually done a lot of work and been better at most of us at getting into spaces you wouldn't suspect we could be into to actually see what people are thinking. We saw the signs of what this administration is doing, having currency well before 2025. I wonder if you could just reflect a bit on what your observation was in the run-up to what we're seeing now.
So, the pilot episode of I have to say hello. Everybody said hello. Hi. I was like, I'm about to be rude. So the pilot episode of United States of America, which many people saw, is me talking to the Ku Klux Klan. We taped that in August of 2014. It didn't air until like April of 2016. And when it aired, we're going back to a time in America where there's a man named President named Barack Obama. I don't know if anybody's old enough to remember that. And when it aired, a lot of people were like, "Why?" I mean, it did a lot, and people watched the show. But people were like, "Why are you talking to the Klan? Why would this be a thing you would focus on? Why are you sort of pulling them out of nowhere to talk to them?" Mostly, this was white people. No offense. Maybe a little offense. You're right. And I had no idea what was coming, but I also knew these ideas that they hold are not some sort of like fringe ideas. They look fringe because of how they're dressed, but as Malcolm X said, many of them have taken off the hoods and put on suits. Mm-hmm. So I knew they were not fringe ideas, but and then within a few months, we saw that they were not fringe ideas. They had become mainstream ideas. They were just dressed up in different types of things on their heads. And so the idea being that like everything that the country is going through now is a thing the country's always been going through. People always ask me, is the country more divided? And I want to be like, more divided than the genocide of Native Americans in the transatlantic slave trade era? And so for me, it's like this country's always been divided, but the people who were on the bad side of the divide didn't have access to microphones and technology to talk about the divide. And so for me, my job, which I sort of learned in real time, and first of all, even being in these rooms with you all, I know I was here 11 years ago, but when I saw Rinku Sen, Rinku's one of the people who was like, come with us. Hey, comedian who seems to care. That's probably not going to work for you well out there. Come with us, and we'll. And then I learned from Rinku and Race Forward that like my job was to be like, I can maybe put the message into a bite-sized, funny way, but then I'm here to point to the other people who have the knowledge. And so what I learned through United Shades, I remember we did in the second season, we did an episode that was in ex-coal miners in Appalachia, and we did an episode on the south side of Chicago with black men who are affiliated with gangs. And the media would tell you that those are, and the coal miners, we talked to some black ones, we talked to a lot of white ones. The media would tell you that white ex-coal miners in Appalachia and black men in gangs in the south side of Chicago are different groups of people. But I was very clearly like, oh, they all want better schools, better jobs, safer communities, to be better policed, better economic policies, and they want the same exact thing. And so from that point forward, I realized that it's very clear that everybody in this country, we may differ on some of the details, but we generally want the same exact things. And then what certain forces in the country have done a good job of is convincing you that the way to get that thing is to demonize trans people, immigrants, Muslims, black people, who else, so that's the way to get what you want, which we know is not true. And that side of the aisle has put a lot of money into astroturfing their message so it seems like it's more popular than it is. And to piggyback on what Rinku says, our side tends to not understand the power of putting money in the hands of the creators who may have some sense of how to communicate the message and saying, take this money, make what you want, I trust you that you're going to do the right thing. And I'm wrapping it up, I swear. I say that because this past winter, after Alex Preddy and Renee Good were killed in Minneapolis, I had this feeling like, I want to go there. I want to go there. I just feel like United Shades was canceled, but I feel like I could go there and do something. And I got connected to the McKnight Foundation, and they made it possible for me to go there and to get footage on the ground. And the videos did really well, and it changed this one guy's business because he was able to say he wanted to give money to the Latino folks in his community because he owned a bodega and he wanted to be able to give them groceries, but he was doing it out of his pocket. And so we put his Venmo out there, and he gets flooded with donations. And it showed that like if our side funds the kind of narratives and lets the people who do those narratives just do what they do, we can actually make a real difference.
No, I appreciate that. And you talk about 2016. I remember I was doing training work with communities, and things were starting to make that turn. And a woman in one of the sessions said, I can't believe the climate in this country has shifted so much. And I just, without thinking, said, the climate hasn't changed at all. We just have better weather reports now. And so we're just really beginning to understand what...
I'm going to start saying that, and I might credit you maybe. We'll see.
No, that's all right. Vina, you have a long history of mobilizing resources in support of communities. And I want you to talk a little bit about what makes community resilient. Particularly, you have been supporting the front lines in Minnesota, which was a flashpoint for all of us to really shine a lens on what was happening in this country. So just any reflections you'd share about that experience?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dwayne, and thank you for coming to Minneapolis and doing that work. Not only were we at Piper Fund doing some work to support work in Minnesota, organizers in Minnesota, but Minneapolis is home for me and has been for a very long time. I live in South Minneapolis, maybe 3 miles from where George Floyd was killed. It's a beautiful city. Lots of parks, a very active, engaged community, and I love it. It's home to a lot of good people. The administration's choice to come to Minnesota was not, it was very intentional, and they were targeting Somali immigrants, black immigrants, very civically engaged community in Minnesota. Vast majority of whom are there legally, many with citizenship. They were targeting a state that wasn't cooperating. They were targeting our governor, who definitely wasn't on their team. So that was their intention. It was also a mistake. It was a mistake for them to come to Minnesota. It was. And I know this because it's home. It's a community that has deeply rooted and trusted community organizations that have built relationship over decades, that have been funded by good people like at McKnight Foundation and others, and that have done that long, hard work of trust building, power building, and community. So that's the first thing that's really critical about that resilience in Minnesota. It's also a place where immigrant-led and people of color-led organizations have been able to find their footing. It's not perfect by any stretch, believe me, but it was because those immigrant-led organizations had already built trust in immigrant communities that they could mobilize people quickly around what was needed at that time. And it couldn't have happened otherwise. The other thing that was really important was we were paying attention and we were learning from organizing that had already happened in LA, in DC, and in Chicago. And we can't take credit in Minnesota for doing what we did because others had already laid that groundwork. I mean, the number of signal threads that I'm on, that many people are on, that came from organizers in Chicago who figured out how to organize at the hyper-local level. And that was a critical piece of it. And finally, you just don't mess with winter people in winter.
In the winter.
We know how to dress. We know how to get out there on the streets. Why? So, but, the other thing is that we had learned some things from 2020. And, Minnesota has been through some hard times. And, the killing of George Floyd taught us a lot. One of them was that you show up in organizing and movement building holistically. It was about mutual aid. It was about caring for our communities that were deeply traumatized by what had happened. And it was also about protesting and showing up in the street. It was also about holding police accountable and advocating for policy change. So that was important, to see the work as not like one answer, all of the answers. And then, the other thing was that we had come to see, it was like we woke up to Earth 2 in 2020, and it was already there, but we had come to see the struggle. Our predominantly white communities in Minnesota had come to see in a very stark way what was happening, what had been happening, and what was happening to our Black communities, our communities of color, often with deadly consequences. And so that was the waking up that was happening. And then, finally, the white community in Minnesota, again, it's a predominantly white community. It's not like California. And they came to understand what people were going through and understand the power of people of color leadership. And that is the hardest part of it because it's still happening. That learning is still having to happen. But what's emerging from that is a kind of solidarity. And that takes time, it takes relationship, and to the point of this gathering, it takes courage to be humble and to move in solidarity with each other.
There can be very subtle forms of courage that can be really powerful. That was one of those moments that we all know where we were when it happened. And so I just love to give the other panelists a moment to say a bit about where you were when it happened or what was happening for your work. You actually went to Minneapolis, but, just if you could share a little bit about that.
Are we talking the 2020 moment or the 2020?
Yeah, it's like, there's so many things that happened.
Right? Well, let's stay with 2025.
2020, I was in Texas, where I have moved recently. It's been really interesting. And I think I was in my living room with the TV on and saw it happen, and then my social feed started blowing up. And I remember making a decision about whether or not to watch the video, which I decided not to do. And I also had been floating for 3 years. I'd finished at Race Forward in 2017. The pandemic hit early in 2020, and by the summer, I was like, obviously, I am not going to build a writing life. That's what I'd been calling myself doing. and I need to find a team and get a job and get back into the fray. I can't be sitting up here dreaming up magazine stories, and which are essentially fantasies because I wasn't going to do the work to make them happen. And I started looking for a job, and I landed at Narrative Initiative shortly after that. But I do remember having to make that decision about watching the video or not, and sometimes feeling guilty that I couldn't, and hoping I could make a contribution anyway.
I want to speak about the moment when Renee Good was killed and where I was, because I think it speaks to this courage theme. So I was at home watching the country respond on social media to the killing of Renee, and wondering if this was going to be the moment, the catalytic moment that really brought millions of people into the streets and broke open what felt like this chill that had come over the country, and this kind of unbearable weighted blanket of silence. And I, because at Caring Cross Generations and at the Domestic Workers Alliance, we've been doing narrative work with storytellers like Kamau in the entertainment industry for some time, and we've been building relationships of trust with storytellers who want to tell stories about caregiving in particular. We have a set of relationships and a set of things that we've done over the years. We knew that the Golden Globes were coming, and people were in the streets in Minneapolis. And we wanted to test to see whether the Golden Globes moment could be a moment when Hollywood actually steps up in a different way to meet the courage of people in the streets in Minneapolis. So Jess Morales-Raquetto at Marimoto, Nalini Stamp at Working Families Power, and Jessica Weitz at ACLU, a bunch of us got on the phone and said, let's see if we can get people pins to wear. And had a whole debate about what the pin should say. Should they say, be good, in honor of Renee Good? Because we felt like we needed to keep the story on Renee, right? In order to kind of keep the momentum going. Or should they say Ice Out, which was the name of the campaign at the time. And so someone on Jess's team went to Michael's in LA and bought up all the homemade button-making kits and hand-printed 300 buttons that said, be good on one hand and Ice Out. And so we had 2 button choices, and we tried to deliver them to everyone we knew, all the agents, all the publicists, and we distributed 300 buttons in less than 24 hours. And Jess's teammate has carpal tunnel to this day from the button press. But we got them out there, and it was interesting because we were able to get some people who were going to be on the carpet to wear the Be Good buttons. No one was going to wear the Ice Out yet, but people were going to wear Be Good. And a few of them. It was the tried and true people like Mark Ruffalo and Gene Smart and our friends. But it wasn't as many as we thought. But because the press was so eager to cover celebrities saying anything about the moment, we got a ton of press. And then that press, I think, really encouraged folks on the ground who were still in the streets. And then a few days later, Alex Preddy is killed. And then we're heading into the Grammys. And at that point, everyone wants an Ice Out button. Everybody's wearing the Ice Out buttons. There are amazing speeches. And there was a virtuous cycle of courage between people who were in the spotlight and people who were in the spotlight in Minneapolis, on the ground, in the streets. And I think that kind of tapping into every aspect and every place where we can show up and show that we see each other in our moments of acts of courage, I think are so important. And they really do, it's a virtuous cycle.
I want to come back to that cycle because in philanthropy, we tend to imitate things that we admire. And one of the challenges we've had this past year has been that a lot of folks have been taking actions but doing so quietly. I actually call it the quiet storm phenomena, right? You're out there, you're taking care of business for somebody, but you're not advertising it because you're trying to protect your grantee or protect your organization, but then others aren't seeing that you're doing it, and that virtuous cycle you described does not ignite in the way that we'd like to see it. So I want to hold on to that thought. But Vina, where were you?
In 2020, it was Memorial Day weekend. I think it was Memorial Day. And I drove by 38th in Chicago. It's close to my house. Like normal, I drove by that earlier in the day and never thought about it. But to this day, I remember having driven by it. It's funny how your memory works. But I just remember later, the next day actually waking up to that news and just feeling this just a deep, deep mourning sadness for our community. And honestly afraid of what was going to happen next because I knew how painful that was for us. And a lot of hard things happened next. And so I'll remember that. For some reason, it was before George Floyd had been killed, but I really remember going by that corner, like I often do. So it sits with me still.
I'll also go with the 2020. So my daughter's birthday is May 25th, which is the day George Floyd was murdered. 2020, she was turning 9. Math is hard. And because it was the pandemic, there was all this like, are we going to have a birthday party? How do we have a birthday party? And we ended up surprising her by inviting her cousins over. And we're setting up the party. And I just remember getting this alert on my phone. And just like, it's the first fun my kids have had in months. And I go, and I'm working at CNN at the time and just realizing like, oh man. Like just anticipating all the like, things that are going to come out of this and the calls and to go on the air to try to explain it because I was one of CNN's explain race people. At the time, they got over it. And interesting enough, at the same time, we were working on an episode of the show. CNN kept going after me to like make a sequel to the Klan episode. They wanted me to hang out with the Ku Klux Klan again because it's so successful. And I kept saying no. I think I got it. We're not going to do a Where Are They Now Klan edition. I think they're in the White House. We purposely, me and the director Mo Fallon, who'd worked with Anthony Bourdain for years, purposely made an episode that was about structural racism and not the kind of Klan racism that sort of, and they fought us. Before George Floyd, they fought us tooth and nail about like, that's not what racism is. Racism is when I don't like you because you're this color. And then George Floyd happened, and everywhere all over the country, there's discussions about structural racism, and then we got a holiday, yay. And it changed the conversation around that episode in a very profound way that I was like, look what it took for us to be able to have a more honest discussion about race and racism. And we included George Floyd's killing in the episode. And to sort of piggyback on what Rinku said, I feel like it makes sense. We're at opposite ends of the couch. I was the person who watched that video every time it came on television. Not because I wanted to, but I felt a responsibility to. Because I know I have to be, I think Rinku did the right thing. I think I did the right thing. I was like, I know I'm going to be in a position where I have to explain this to people. And I just felt like I have to therefore watch it every time and take it in so I can better talk about it when I'm out there in their world.
So we're clearly in that second Earth now. And I'm wondering if we can talk about what it takes to just survive that, but begin the hard work of building that Earth we haven't seen yet. You all bring different aspects of what we need in that. So I'd love for each of you just reflect on the role you think is most important for you to help us move towards Earth 3.
Want me to start? At Narrative Initiative, for some years, including the years before I joined the staff, we've been looking for cross-cutting themes and ideas. ideas that would work across issues and across identities. Because it's really, when you deal with the foundational, the deepest held values in the society, it's pretty difficult to evoke new ones or change them going issue by issue or community by community. We have to be able to saturate, which means every time you look around, you're going to be reminded that humans thrive collectively, not individually, or everybody deserves justice and dignity. So we have landed on care as that theme, and that's a different choice from ones that some of our peers have made to focus on solidarity or to focus on democracy. We like those, but we actually think they're too abstract. People don't experience them frequently enough to be able to attract people to the big tent that we all talk about we need. We all are like obsessed with the big tent. But something has to attract people to our big tent who are not already on their way. If they're already on their way, they're hearing from us quite a lot. But if they're a little reluctant, they're like, I'm not sure those are my people. Maybe they're too woke. Maybe they're too colored. Maybe they're too queer. Maybe they're richer than I am, elites. They're like reluctant to come in the direction of our tent, even though they want universal health insurance, they want their kids to have a decent education, they want to be able to put enough food on the table. So I think what Aijen's work has shown us is that care, everybody is fluent in what it takes to get through life. Not everybody is fluent in big social concepts, rule of law, democracy, solidarity, but everybody knows what it takes to keep yourself alive, keep your family thriving, and make your community one that is like good to be in. So we're going super concrete. We're going to be trying to meet people at life before we meet them at politics. And life is about taking good care of all the things that we're responsible for. It's like core human responsibility, sacred to most of us. And what feminists have taught us is it's not a private matter, and it should appear everywhere. It certainly should be in childcare and healthcare, but it also should be in housing and transit and climate and the way we do life. So we're moving something we call Take Good Care, because we're going to try to make a narrative shift where the dominant narrative now is nobody cares. Nobody cares but you, and you have to take care of yourself. No one's going to come help you. But actually, we all take good care. That's how we do life. And we model that good care. I think what we saw in Minnesota is neighborism is us modeling how we take good care. And through civic action, we fight for it. So I think a new but very ancient organizing model is emerging in this country that treats community action, mutual aid, tutoring, a place for the kids to hang out in the afternoon, movie nights, I don't know, bowling, all the things where people just be together. That is as important a piece of work as any civic action campaign is. And in fact, civic action is the hardest kind of action to get people to take, because it's scary and it's inconvenient and it's kind of abstract. So we need a pipeline that is an action-first pipeline. And in order to have that, we have to be building up community ties, community cohesion. And I think the last thing I want to say here is that much of the movement has taken an information-first approach. People don't know. If they only knew, they would make a different decision. And I'm sorry, but nobody likes to be told that they didn't know something, or they made the wrong decision, or they don't see the whole picture. We don't like to be told that. Because human nature, like, you're told that you're wrong, you kind of shut down. So an information-first approach is always going to have a little bit of that distance between the narrator and the audience. And might actually be depressing action, sending people to their beds. We spend so much of our narrative real estate on the problem, the like billionaires who made the problem happen, and the violent men who are going to enforce the problem. We're contributing to the hope gap. So if everything is problem, 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 and then you get like 8 minutes of problem, 1 minute of solution, and then a call to action that's like, sign this petition, that does not make sense to people. How is signing this petition gonna like solve this problem that you've convinced me is so enormous? So we need to get more concrete. We need to offer people easy, accessible, appealing action that is rewarding, And I think if we do that, then the more traditional kinds of organizing we have been used to calling organizing will really grow. But it means thinking of the job of organizing as a different job than the way I was taught it, which was do campaigns, 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 and the actions you try to get people to take are campaign actions. And if they don't, you move on to the next person. We cannot move on. We have to keep trying to get people who are not already on their way to our big tent. Otherwise, our tent is not going to be big enough for the challenges ahead.
My work right now is also focused on care, but in a slightly different way. It's looking at the bridge between Earth 2 and Earth 3, understanding that there are 91 million people who didn't vote in the last election, and there are maybe half of the people who voted for Trump are not MAGA identified, but maybe thought that he would be better on the economy, or, right? There's just a lot of people that we need to be engaged with right now, and there's also 130 million people who are in caregiving relationships in our country, actively. How many of you here are caregiving for a loved one or have in the past? Okay. So it's a massive body of us because there's just a huge need, and it is the most fundamental role that we play in life. And so we are going to be taking this moment. There's like, on the federal level, a massive crisis unfolding with $1 trillion in cuts to the Medicaid program that's about to be rolled out, and these really horrible, onerous work requirements that are going to be imposed on everyone in order to get access to Medicaid. At the same time, there are these state and local really exciting examples of moving towards free childcare. Like the state of New Mexico just made childcare free for everyone, funded by a tax on fossil fuels. Mayor Mamdani in New York is also expanding access to universal childcare in the city. Virginia just became the first state in the South to pass paid family and medical leave. So we're making progress on the care agenda, and so we need to, like, on the one hand, make sure that that stuff succeeds because it is the beacon, the light. And then we're going to go out and do 1 million conversations with working families about their caregiving experiences. And by the we, there's a whole ecosystem of organizations who've been working together since the pandemic called Care Can't Wait. And we're all going to be working together to go out and speak to 1 million families, literally, and mostly listen to how they are experiencing caregiving in this moment, and their challenges, their hopes, their aspirations, the solutions they believe will help address the challenges they face. And we're going to really zero in on this group of families that earns just enough not to be eligible for public assistance, but not enough to afford to pay out of pocket for care, or really anything. And they're really the families who are on the front lines of the affordability crisis in this country across race. And we're going to listen to their experiences, their aspirations, and then we're going to read back out to them, bring them into our movement, read back out to them what we heard, and offer a solution, an Earth-3 solution for care in the future that we will hopefully gather and announce people at a national family caregiving convention in June of next year. We're really excited to talk to families here in Northern California and around the state, families across race. And it's that group of people, I think, right now across the country who feel the least seen and heard. And we want to make sure that they know that not only do we care, but we want to fight for them and with them. And that might be the single most important thing we do to get us out of Earth 2 to Earth 3, at least in this. And I do think that this is a universal issue and need, and all the polling tells us that independents, conservatives, everyone actually knows that they're doing the best they can, and they need a different set of supports when it comes to care, that this isn't just an individual problem. So that'll be the door that we try to walk through and try to listen and engage and keep people engaged to get to Earth 3.
Thank you. From the philanthropy side of things, where I sit right now, you know, the thing that I'm talking about with my colleagues is just our need to be committed to the long term, that organizing and movement building works, and we need to stick with it and we need to fund it. And to the points that both Rinku and Ai-jen are making, it's holistic, it's bigger than a campaign, it's not short term, it's long term, and it includes mutual aid, it includes community care, it includes art and culture and narrative work, and it includes protest and dissent and advocacy. All of those things are important, and the challenge is we need to stick with it long enough to get the results. And that's where I'm worried. Philanthropy has a tendency to chase the shiny object, and right now, so I was at Race Forward with Dwayne in 2020. Were you weren't there in 2020, were you? Okay, in 2020 I was there, and
I saw you in staff meeting, it was cool.
yeah, and a lot of money came in to racial justice organizing and movement building at that time, at the national level, at the local level, flooded with resources in a good way. And we did not fix racism when that money disappeared. It's still with us. And so the problem is that money has been pulled out of those efforts, and now the shiny object is democracy, anti-authoritarianism, and that kind of work. That's also important. But they are, to your point, Ai-jen, it's just different doors into the same space. It's the same work. We're really working to build a socially, racially, economically just community, period. So however it is we call it, or whether we're funding organizing in the traditional sense, or mutual aid, or narrative work, let's just all be moving into that same middle and stick with it long enough to see the results. And that's what I'm hoping my friends in philanthropy are doing. It's what I challenge ourselves to do at Piper Fund. We have to raise the money to give it away, so we have to make that case too. But it's just what we have to be committed to for the long term.
Everyone's just been listening. What was the question?
What's your game plan to help us get to Earth 3 in this moment?
As a person who's primarily creative and a person in the business, I just understand now that, for example, United States was on the air for 7 years. They're not making those shows anymore. Mm-hmm. So even me reaching out to the Ignite Foundation and working with the Been Doing Stuff Doris Duke Foundation is like realizing that, like, if I can't count on the industry that I came up in to do the work that I want to do, so I have to figure out how to do it myself. Either, if I'm actually right now producing a podcast, and I went from trying to sell it to somebody to realizing, I got to pay for this myself so I can own it, so I can have control over it. And I think it's a really scary place to be. No, I don't think. It is a scary place to be as a creator, as who also has married, 3 daughters, taking care of my 8 and 9-year-old mom, and to say, but I need to own this thing because if I don't own it, then it can be taken away from me, like United Shades of America was taken away from me. So that's why it was so great to connect with McKnight and with Doris Duke and realize that they were, the thing about McKnight I want to really highlight is that I went from I would like to go to after Renee Good was murdered, and I was like, I feel like I want to go there. I was at Sundance when Alex Peretti was murdered, and you saw the whole Sundance be like, are we still just supposed to go to parties? Mm-hmm. And then there were some actions that took place at Sundance. And my friend was like, who was helped me do this, was like, do you still want to go to Minneapolis? I go, yeah, sure do. And that was like a Sunday, met with them on a Thursday. I was buying tickets on a Saturday, and I flew out on Sunday. As you know, that's not a traditional model of philanthropy or foundation. So that they really realized that we have to make this happen quickly because the benefit outweighs the fact that we normally have to go through whatever the process is. And I think the more that people in these rooms realize, just get the money to the people who make the content and then get out of their way, and they will then make the thing, and you'll get what you get and you won't get upset. The more we can have the effect on the culture that we should be having, because there are more of us than them. We're just not as what's the word I'm looking for, as cynically organized as they are.
It feels like a lot of what's happening right now, too, is and not just here, but globally, so much easier to harm communities once you dehumanize them. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit, and I know, Ajin, you guys have been doing some work, really to lift up the humanity of care workers. What is the way we get folks to really recognize that our global community is not just a sliver of 8 billion people?
Well, I think this is really our moment. All of us who are here, I think, are working on this question of humanity on some level. And we are working against systems that have dehumanized institutions, narratives, cultural norms that have dehumanized people in different ways. And I believe this is our moment. Amidst so much dehumanization at so many levels, including the kind of extractive technologies that are trying to replace the human in so many parts of life and the economy, this is our moment to refocus our collective attention in this country and around the world on humanity and human dignity and its unique place and value in society and in every aspect of life on Earth. This is our moment. And if we can't do that now, we have to.
Don't finish that sentence.
There's no if. We have to. This is it. And so I just, when I think about care, for example, care work, caregivers, it's always been devalued, right? In culture, in our economy, it's like seen as kind of a thing that we all just do. And it's not really support, it's not really accounted for. There's no accounting for it in the GDP. You don't count for it anywhere. And so whether you're a family caregiver who does it for a loved one, or you're a professional care worker who has to choose a life of poverty if you choose to stay in this work, that is a fundamental thing, that the input, the life force that makes everything else possible in society is the least visible and valued in our economy. This is our moment to turn that to flip that inside out, upside down, and to actually revalue the stuff that matters most. Including our human relationships, our trust, our creativity. And so I think it's like, how do we do that without running, and actually running towards the ways in which we've been dehumanized is actually a way to do that. A lot of people are running from race. We can't do DEI, we can't say this, we can't say that. Actually, no. This is the moment that we can see it all so clearly, clear enough to uproot it in a whole new way for Earth 3. And I know that sounds really abstract, maybe kind of, I don't know, vague, but in the world of care, like, I really do believe that we could be the generation to transform how we support and value caregiving for future generations to come. And all of this extractive, dehumanizing swirl around us is like reinforcing our argument if we organize right.
Yes. I don't know if the reframe that you've been putting on narrative has enough knowledge behind it to verify that's there. How long have you guys been looking at care as this frame?
Oh, years. It's taken like 3 years to write an 18-page concept paper, which I feel some shame about, but I think ideas take a while to get clear. What I want to contribute now to this conversation is something that Marshall Soul, who is a leader in our field and I think might be joining this community soon, said to me in 2021. He said, you know, when we tell the stories of people who are impacted by these systems, by people who are in prison or who are primary caregivers for their families or who, are poor, when we tell their stories, we're telling a lot of sad stories. And when we invite them to tell their own stories, we're often asking them to talk about the worst thing that ever happened to them again and again and again. This happens a lot in the gun violence debate. So survivors of gun violence are asked to tell their story to all kinds of audiences over and over again. Like, imagine, and I hope this isn't actually what any of you are living. Imagine what that would be like. You've lost your child, your parent, your best friend, your partner to a shooter, and you have to relive that story many times for the rest of your life in order to convince people to put some money into that fight. And what Marshall said to me is, when we tell those stories, we're generating compassion and empathy, but we're not generating trust in and respect for that person and those people. And what we need to be asking them, instead of what was this horrible experience, is what do you think we need to do? What is your advice for the society? What kind of laws do we need? What should our systems be looking like? Because if we're real about the idea that the people who have been through it are the source of the solutions, we need to start talking about their solutions and giving them the space to talk about their solutions. Instead of this, honestly paternalistic, tell me your sad story so I can send some charity your way business that we've got going on. So if you're working in communications at your foundation, this is something that you can really lead on, is telling the stories of your grantees and of their members in a different way so that trust in and respect for is what is generated in the audiences who are hearing them.
We have about 15 minutes left, so I'm wondering what you each think is the most important thing to support movement work right now that's trying to weather Earth 2, even as we talk about building Earth 3. And that's part of the challenge, right? It's like, how do you build the future when you're just trying to protect the communities that you're supporting? So any observations on ways this audience can be supportive of folks in that moment? And we'll get to a what do you want from philanthropy question at the end, so don't, but in this particularly, the nature of support for groups at the front lines right now, what's most critical?
Do you want it? Sorry.
I know that one thing that we're thinking about a lot right now and have been doing our best to resource is around safety and security, sustainability of community-based groups. So thinking about, of course, their physical safety and security, but also digital safety and security. One thing that we've been focusing on at Piper Fund and Proteus Fund as a whole is operational compliance, resilience, and the idea, it sounds really dry, but the idea is that let's make sure that these, again, trusted organizations deeply rooted in communities, doing the hard work day after day, can sustain through the attacks that they're facing right now. And this administration is coming after progressive organizations, grassroots groups, movement building groups, and targeting things like their C3 status. You know, targeting what should be their constitutionally protected speech. And so how do we make sure that we're all supporting them through this Earth 2 moment so that we can get to Earth 3 and that we still have, you know, those really important organizations in our communities?
I would say the thing that I always tell everybody is make sure you're actively in charge of your own algorithm on your social media. Make sure you're actively paying attention to what's going on and understand that you are a broadcaster when you're on social media. So make sure you're broadcasting like content that is inclusive of many different perspectives, and understand that you actually have the ability to, through whatever, if you're on these platforms, that you have the ability to constantly send out better information. So stop being so much a receiver of social media and be more of a, think of yourself as like, this is my TV network. So I'm going to use this to broadcast messages that I think need to be out in the world. Not just my own messages, not just the messages of my community that I'm regularly working in, those two, but also messages that are helping people in your network see lots of different perspectives. I think the more we can sort of the more we can sort of understand that when we're on these devices that we actually need to be sort of like actively disrupting the algorithm, the more we can take charge of it and not just be run by the algorithm.
I would say that if there are grantees of yours that you're not totally sure, like think about leaders and institutions right now as our, what's the word? They are like our nucleus, they're our immune cells. And how do we do the kind of immunotherapy that strengthens those cells and gives those cells the opportunity to do what is necessary in this time without a lot of prescription about what that necessarily means, because we don't actually know. I will say that my orientation around what needs to happen changes pretty often. And that's hard. I'm somebody who, my husband calls me like a dog with a bone, because I have been doing care for 30 years and I just like keep going and keep going. But like I do think it's important that we are able to have the support and the accompaniment of our funders to pivot as needed, to change course, change direction, and not have to worry about keeping the lights on or navigating through mass layoffs. And because I do think that there's a way in which these institutions and these leaders and the relationships between them are really all we have in this time. And so to the extent that we don't know exactly what it's going to take to get us out of Earth 3 and out of Earth 2 and to the Earth 3 that we know we need and deserve, some flexibility, a lot of trust. I know that there's a whole movement around trust-based philanthropy that many of you have championed for a long time. The value of trust in a time like this one in Earth 2 could not be overstated. It is the thing, it is all we have. And so to the extent that we can continue to nurture that trust where it exists between us and in the field, and see where it takes us, I think that may be the next best step.
I think that people in the work need to have all of the resources. Some of them are moral resources, some of them are material resources, but they need the resources to be able to operate with speed and urgency. Narrative is long-term work, but it's not like we sit and think about it for 10 years and then do something. You make plans for 10, 20 years, but you have to do the things now. So, and you have to do the things now where you find openings. If we keep trying to walk through on the terrain that the right has set, they attack DEI, we come up with an answer for defending DEI. We're always going to be on their terrain, but every day there are openings to walk through some other space, a space about care, a space that's funny, a space that's athletic, a space that is crafty. I don't know. There's so many spaces. People are really varied, and things are always happening. But if you're not able to step into that space when the space opens, then you're going to miss the space, and some other narrative is what's going to fill it. And we're all narrating all the time. We're already narrating, so the goal is to be deliberate, to be able to make decisions about what we're narrating and how. So speed and urgency. And the second thing I'm going to say is people have to have the space to fail. There has to be no pressure to succeed. We need to take an audience-first approach, not a speaker-first approach. I know what I want to say, and no matter who's in front of me, I'm going to say it. That's not going to really work for us now. We need to be talking with people in terms that they can relate to, that they can identify with. And sometimes we're going to fail. We're going to try something. We're about to try breaking up the manosphere with 16 to 25-year-old men who are in the sports and fitness and finance spaces online. A bunch of that is going to fail. I will just tell you right now. In most of my career, honestly, most of the time, we have failed. But the 20% of time that you succeed, built on all those failures, is what drives us forward. So there has to be no pressure to succeed. Here's the resources, go do the thing, let us know how it goes, let's learn from what there is to learn, and if we manage to move an inch forward, we're going to celebrate the hell out of that. Drop the I word was like 13 years ago. But young immigrants still tell me when I read the news to my parents every morning, it is such a relief not to have us represented in that way. So that's like a 20% success in a long career of many failures. But more than a decade later, it still helps the constituency feel entitled to dignity and justice and humanity. And nobody funded that. Nobody. So don't make us subsidize your lack of funding with our labor and sleepless nights and food stamps. Try to fund it without the pressure to succeed. Thank you.
So I'm going to turn to a final question. I'm going to go back to something you said, Kamau, and you said that story about in a week you were there, and it wasn't the traditional way of doing business for a funder. At NCG, we talk a lot about setting the floor for what's accepted, but blowing out the ceiling with what we need to really be ambitious about. So I invite each of you to offer up something for people to hold today as they go to the day's proceedings about a floor they could set or a ceiling they could burst with their actions, particularly thinking about trying to build that place we've never been before.
I mean, I would try to break the time-space continuum in ways that gets more money out the door way faster. A month should be enough, frankly, from request to cash.
I would try to double down on big ideas that have a credible enough theory, and really fund them at the level that they need to be funded. This is not a time for us to be doing really big things, fighting the most powerful forces in the world with half of the budget.
I think understand our role each of us individually, our foundation, our donor collaborative, whatever it is, understand what we're doing, our role in the work, and then just as importantly, understand how it's connected to the whole. Like, get a really clear understanding, analysis of the big picture and how we're all together moving in that direction together. And I think that will help us feel powerful and not that we're trying to chase something new and exciting, but that we're really in it together.
Yeah, I would say put money in the hands of the creators and then get out of their way. I think the more you can sort of know that, like, the more you stay out of the way of the person you sort of trusting to tell the narrative, and it may not all, as Rinku was saying, it may not all end up exactly what you wanted, but the more freedom that people in these spaces have, who are the creators, who are making the content, to do what they do, you may be like, we don't like those 8, but that one will work. And I think you have to understand that, like, the more the freedom that the creator has, the more powerful the content will be, because it'll be less diluted by being like checked and double checked. And so put the money in the hands of the creator. I can think of one creator personally who has 3 kids and a mom, I think you talked about earlier. But anyway, and just let that person go. Let that, if you're gonna form a relationship with somebody and you're saying, I trust you, then let them do what they do.
Well, who knows what the next year will bring when we bring you all back on stage again. But we know you'll all be in the fight. You'll be leading the charge and helping us find our way to that third Earth. Join me in thanking this fantastic panel for their opening reflections.